Um, okay, so hello everyone. I'm going to share my screen as we get started here. So as Brian said, my name is Kristen Kibblehouse and I am the Community Engagement Manager at the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. So we are located in Chatham, which is on Cape Cod. So depending on how you have your Zoom set up, you might see my face in the top corner. So if you do, I'm currently making an arm, like I'm showing my muscle off to you all. And where Chatham is located, we're in the elbow of the Cape. So that is where the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy is based out of. And what we are is that we are a nonprofit. So with that, we kind of separate ourselves into three different tiers. So the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, first and foremost, we help fund and collaborate the research that is being done with Dr. Greg Skomal and the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries. So if anyone has watched Shark Week in the last 10 years, you'll probably seen a Shark Week episode with Dr. Skomal on it, featuring these great white sharks that are off of our coastline here off of Cape Cod. With that research that we are collaborating with him on, we are giving that research to the towns, the national seashore, your lifeguards, and to the public to help increase public safety here along the coastline here along Massachusetts. And then as well as that, yes, we're gathering all this amazing information about these fish in our oceans. We want to educate everybody then about these sharks and what we are learning. So here at the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, we do believe in research, that public safety, and in education is then fully going to further that understanding and knowledge of great white sharks, and then as well as further that conservation of the species, not just here in the Atlantic Ocean, but in all oceans of the world that we do find them in. So with that, here off the coast of Cape Cod, we do have a very unique opportunity when studying these great whites along our coastline. So if you guys are not familiar, there are 5 distinct populations of white sharks along our world. So obviously being the one here in the northwest Atlantic, and where we are right here in that tiny area here off of Massachusetts. But we do see these white sharks in the Pacific Ocean off of Guadalupe Island in Mexico and in the Baja area, and then off of the Farallon Islands in California. We also see them off of South Africa in False Bay and Mussel Bay. And this is where probably you are most familiar with seeing these white sharks, because this is where you see those famous photos and videos of them making these incredible breaches and jumps up out of the water to capture their prey. And then we also have them here along the Australian coastline and the New Zealand coastline. And in these areas, researchers have been studying these white sharks for decades. But here on the East Coast of the United States, we really haven't been able to have that kind of access to this fish. In recent years, we have, but in previous, really the only access we were able to get from great white sharks is when they were caught as bycatch, or they washed up dead or brought in by that recreational and commercial fishery that we used to have for them. So with that, we were learning a lot about the general biology of this fish, looking at their internal and external anatomy, and really learning about their life cycle. But we really weren't learning about their movements and where they were going. So here you are looking at, this is a white shark that was caught by bycatch. And what you are looking at is a full-grown adult male white shark. And then the human to size here to help scale, this man's about 6 feet in length. So that you can see how large that these fish do get here in our ocean. This other photo then that you are seeing, this circle, this is actually a cross-section of a white shark vertebra. And this is where that life cycle research really ties in. So very similar to a tree, you can count the rings of a shark and you can get the general age estimate of that individual. So with this kind of research being done in the early 80s and 90s, it is now said that the white shark has a life expectancy of 60 to 70 years. So in this time frame, this is what we were really learning about these species. And in that, it is estimated that we killed almost 80% of the population of white sharks here in the Atlantic Ocean. So we started seeing them less, and with that, they were put under a protection. So in 1997, the great white shark was put under a federal protection. And then in 2005 is when they were actually put under a state water protection here in Massachusetts. So with that protection, you are not allowed to go out and purposely commercially fish or recreationally fish this species anymore. If you were to have it caught on your line, you do have to cut it off the line and release it. With that, we are seeing now this shark, this great white shark, be able to feed on its food source now around here, the gray seal. And with that, this is also another conservation success story behind the gray seals with that Marine Mammal Protection Act. I won't get in too much about the conservation around seals because I know Ashley and Geneva will touch on that in a little bit. But I do want to note that one of the reasons why we are seeing these sharks come back to our coastlines here off of Cape Cod is because one of that protection of predator, which is the white shark, and then that protection of prey, which is the gray seal as well. And with that, we are very lucky that we are able to experience some of these predator and prey interactions along our coastline. This video was taken a few years back of one of our white sharks named Lumpy, and you can see that seal jumped out of the water really quick. Lumpy kind of did a little breach to try to catch him. And you can see here that, yes, these sharks are very skilled predators, but sometimes seals can outsmart them and run away. So you can see that that seal kind of slapped its flipper in Lumpy's face, almost fell on top of Lumpy, and then was able to swim away. So now off the coast here of Cape Cod, we are able to watch these interactions here, and specifically what we are focusing on is how close these interactions are coming into shore, which I will touch on in a little bit. With that, these sharks are not just feeding on seals along our coastline. We do see them feeding along the dead whales as well. And then we also will see them feed on striper and sea bass too. So we will typically not see a white shark prey on an alive whale. They will be on a whale that is dead. We actually just last week, we had a reported dead whale off of Monomoy, and the research team was able to go out, and Dr. Greg Skomal was able to tag the first 3 white sharks of our 2020 season that way. So yes, summertime may have not have started, but the sharks are back here for the season. Within the last week, we've been getting a lot of reports of people seeing sharks out on their boat. But with that, having this protection of white sharks here along the coastline of Massachusetts, and as well as on that federal level, we are now being able to really do elongated studies on this species here, just like people do on those other populations throughout the world. So with that here, it is typically what we call white shark season from around June to the end of November. So we really have this exciting chance to be able to study them for an elongated time in the same place. So with that, in the research, this is our research area, Cape Cod. So we do focus on the outer arm, or that ocean side here. And then as of last year, this research team did start sampling inside of Cape Cod Bay as well. Yes, sharks do come in the bay. I know that is a myth that people say that sharks are not in the bay. They are. And so we did start doing research inside of the bay last season, and we will continue that this year as well. With that, a lot of people think that they can just go out on their boat or go out on the beach and they're going to find that white shark there really easy. And I wish it was that easy, but it's not. So we actually use a spotter pilot. So this is the plane that Mr. Wayne Davis flies, and he is able to find sharks for us. He actually has the best view because seeing the sharks from the air is actually really easy. It's just kind of finding this big black blob swimming in the sand, and with that he's able to find that shark, and it's a sophisticated game of Marco and Polo with him and our research team. So once Wayne is able to direct our research team to a shark, then we are able to do research on it. And as I said earlier, a lot of people think when we are spotting sharks, this is the photo or the visual that we get. It's a beautiful sunny day, the water is clear, and that shark is close to the surface, and you have that dorsal fin sticking up out of the water. And I wish I could say that's how easy it is, but it's not. This is a 1 in 1,000 day, and this is what we usually see. This is that classic kind of black purpley shark smudge. And with that, when you guys are out on your boat, this is a lot of times what you can see as well, and it's actually hard to see and look for. This can be right beside our boat. You can kind of see in the upper right here that it's really glary. And if the glare is bad and you don't have those proper polarized sunglasses, you might not even see it right beside the boat. So that's why it is key that we use that spotter pilot to help us in those research days. But once we are beside the shark, we start the first step of research on that individual, which is taking GoPro video. I do want to note that when researching these sharks, we are not chumming the water. We are not rod and reeling these sharks in. They are staying in the water and they are still swimming. So we want to make sure that we are not affecting the natural movements of these fish and not stressing them out in any way as we are doing research on them, because they are so close to shore. So once we are on this shark, we are getting that GoPro video footage of it. So we will get the video of the right side of that fish and then maneuver the boat around to get video of the left side of that fish. So we can see, you know, scarrings, coloration, and things like that. So here is an example of what one of those GoPro videos can look like. So you can see that shark is swimming by, and we would be able to take stills of that video to see if there's any kind of scarring. And we do get sharks that check out our GoPro a lot. Be the same as how you guys are sitting in your homes right now. If all of a sudden a camera crew just popped in and started videoing you, you would want to investigate why that camera crew is there too. So we do have sharks kind of play around and check out the GoPro. Sharks, they can't move their fins, so they can't touch. So their way of touching is with their mouth and kind of figuring out what this thing is beside them. But once we do get that video of that shark, oh, hold on one moment, skipped ahead. Once we get video of that shark, then we can see if it has any specialized coloration or scarring with it. So you can see here, so the photo on my left, you can see that the shark has a special kind of white coloring on the side of its gill slit and also has some scars. And then on its dorsal fin, it has that kind of, we call an eyelet, has that color eyelet on there. And also has some major scarring along the side of its body. So this is a really great way that if we can see that shark come back the next year and we get video of it, that's a great way to identify that that shark came back. And one way that we also identified the shark was from the air. So our amazing spotter pilot, Wayne Davis, also takes aerial photography, and he was able to watch a shark prey on a seal. This time, the seal was not so lucky to get away, but sharks, just like all animals, they have to eat. They have to eat to sustain themselves, and sharks, they sustain themselves with seals. But with this photo, you can actually see from the air that eyelet and that coloring on the gill slit there. So we were able to ID that shark from the air. You can also see here then on my right, this is from White Shark Curly. She was first identified in 2010, and she was also seen again in 2012, and we can re-identify her from those patterns and colorations. So with this way of IDing, the research team has taken thousands of videos this way, and they have been able to ID over 300 individual great white sharks just by looking at GoPro footage, which is really incredible. But once we are able to take GoPro footage of that shark is now when we can actually tag them. So tagging is easier said than done. With that GoPro footage, that GoPro is attached to a painter pole, and so it can get really far deep into the water, where for tagging, we want to make sure that we're not injuring the shark, and as well as our researcher, Dr. Greg Spommel, is not injuring himself while trying to tag that shark, because remember, they are freely swimming as he is doing this. So the shark has to be at least 2 feet from the surface of the water for him to place that tag accurately. And that will go on the base of the dorsal fin, and that tag then gets inserted into the muscle. So the tag that we use is an acoustic tag. So this acoustic tag that you see here on the left of the screen, this is that internal dart that gets inserted into the muscle of the body. This tag then correlates with one of these, and this is called an acoustic receiver. It is a big black cylinder that hangs off of this yellow buoy right here. And this system works very similar to Easy Pass. So just like how you have a transponder in your car, and once you go through the toll booth, and then the toll booth records your Easy Pass and you get charged. It's very similar to how our acoustic tags and receivers work. So if a shark has this acoustic tag on it and it swims within 300 meters of this acoustic receiver, that receiver is going to know that it's there and download then the date, the time, and the tag number of that individual shark. So each one of these tags has its own special number, like we all have our own phone number. Now, these receivers do not work in real time. We do have to go out to each of them and pull them out of the water and download it via Bluetooth to see what sharks have been recorded on that receiver. There are a few that do have this in real time. The technology is still being tested, and we have about 3 or 4 beaches here off the Cape that are helping the state in testing that technology. And with this tagging, we are able to get this data and seeing where these sharks are along our coastline. So you are looking at a detection map from our data from 2019. Now, these are not all the receivers that we have out. So last year, there was about 70 receivers that were placed along the waters of Massachusetts. This year, it is increased to 100. So these are just a few here that I am showing. So by no means, this is not all of them. So let's look where I am at in Chatham. So you see that purple square with the number 69 in it? That is showing you that 69 individual tagged white sharks were recorded on that receiver during the research season. So these receivers go in the water. Last year, they went in the water around March, April, and they got pulled out in December. This year, because of COVID-19, unfortunately, some receivers are out in the water. I know Plymouths are out. I know a few in the bay are out and on the outer arm, but not all of them are out yet due to those COVID regulations right now. So we might see results skewed this year, but time will tell. So you can see on the outer arm of Cape Cod, those numbers are much larger in white shark detections than they are inside of the bay. And then we also see that sharks are going into the North and South Shore, where Duxbury, Marshfield, and Scituate as well. We do have receivers in the Nantucket Sound and Buzzards Bay and around the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, but I just didn't have room to fit this on my map today, but we do have receivers along those as well. So with this data, we are able then to give this data to those local beaches, the National Seashore, so they can see these sharks here when they are around their beaches. What's great about these receivers, it records every single time that shark swims by. So if that's 5 times or 5,000 times, it's going to record that. So then those lifeguards and our researchers can use that to see if there is a time of day that those sharks can be in that area more often than other. And with this, we are figuring out that these sharks are not going to the same place at the same time. And we are seeing that these sharks are going past Massachusetts. We see them going past the New Hampshire area and into Maine and Canada. And Greg Skomal is working with the researchers in Canada as well to see where those sharks are moving around in Canada. I did forget to mention my people here that are from New Hampshire. There used to be a receiver near the Isle of Shoals area. Shoals Marine Lab used to put out receivers around there, but they do not anymore. But I know they are looking to try to get those out again soon. So when they did have them out, we did have one of our famous white sharks. Her name is Keely. She was recorded off of that one in 2017. So we do see white sharks come up the coastline and through New Hampshire as well. But all of this data is bringing us back to that public safety aspect. So here on Cape Cod, the beaches on the outer arm of Cape Cod are starting to fly these purple shark flags that you see here. And those fly 24/7 for that reminder of beachgoers that potential predator can be in the ocean. And one of the common misconceptions that we have here during our research is that we are farther offshore, but when ideally we're not. So this photo is taken standing right on the beach, and that boat you see there, that's our research boat. So we are working relatively close to shore when we are seeing these white sharks. And one of the reasons is because of their prey. The gray seal is hanging around the coastline as well. So being the smart animal that they are, they're going to hang around their food, just how, you know, maybe you're at a buffet or you're at a party. I know I hang around the snack table when I'm at a party. So, you know, you want to be around where your food source is. So with that and having those flags there, that flag is that constant reminder to people to be shark smart when they are entering the waters here along our coastline. And there are some tips that we do, and the National Seashore and lifeguards are giving people if you would like to still enjoy the waters here off of Cape Cod. It is suggested that you do not go more than that you do not go more than waist deep. And with that, if you do like to surf or windsurf or paddleboard, that you are still more than welcome to do so, but it is suggested that you do that in more of a group setting and then instead of a solo setting. Towns here on the Cape are also offering Stop the Bleed trainings, where you can learn how to packed wounds and use hemostatic bandages, and as well as how to properly apply a tourniquet. A lot of surfers here along the Cape now do carry tourniquets on them or in their backpacks on the beaches, just in case a bite would happen. Here on the Cape Cod, being a seasonal area, our lifeguards are seasonal. So when surfing is great in October and November, when we're still seeing white sharks here, we really don't have lifeguards here. So these surfers are coming together to be more shark smart and having those trainings in case a bite would happen. But with that, another way that you can be shark smart is that we do have an app called Sharktivity, and this is where that we are putting in our shark sightings. This is where if you see a shark, you can put in a shark sighting, and this isn't just for the coast here of Massachusetts. You can do this if you are in New Hampshire and you see a shark, put in that sighting. If you're in Maine and you see a shark, put in that sighting. If you're in South Carolina, put in that sighting. We want to have this awesome database on the East Coast where people are seeing these white sharks. So with that, anytime you see that blue fin with an icon, that's a sighting. So that can be done by the research boat, somebody that sees a shark, or our ecotourism boat. These orange icons that kind of look like a little beacon, that's where our receivers are. So all of our 2019 data is up on the app. So if you download the app and you want to see where these sharks are in the area, you are more than welcome to do so and check that out. Now, if you would have the app on your phone and you would see this red icon, this is an alert. So an alert is put out by either our research team, the lifeguards, a beach manager when a white shark is near a public beach. So this is then that public safety aspect being tied into this app to be able to help people be more aware where sharks are. Now, unfortunately, this cannot be an end all be all for shark sightings. Our research boat is only out two days a week, and lifeguards can only see the best that they can. So with that, even though you might say, oh, there wasn't a shark spotted at Nauset Beach for 5 days, it must be safe to swim there, we still say that if the water is salty, there's a potential that that shark could be there. Just because a sighting has not been there doesn't mean that a shark cannot be there. And then we also have this green icon, which is our sharks that have a satellite tag attached to them. We have white shark Josiah, who's been making his way up the East Coast, and he has this tag, and he actually just pinged yesterday off the coast here of the Cape. So if you want to follow his journey and where he is swimming, you can check that out as well. But with that, with this research and public safety and learning more about these sharks, we can further understand the species here, not just off our coastline, but then throughout the whole East Coast here of the United States. We really don't know much about these sharks. We know a lot about their general biology, but really their movements, we really don't know if there's a rhyme or reason yet for that. We have seen sharks, like one of my favorite shark is White Shark James. We have seen him come back to the Cape for 6 years straight. Where then we have other sharks that we've seen come back every other year. Some come just like we have like our summerers come back Memorial Day and they leave Columbus Day. Some are coming right in September. So trying to get more tags on these individuals and being able to track them is going to be able to have us further understand this species and their movements. So with that, guys, I want to say thank you, and I hope you learned more about sharks today. And then we can get into more than learning about their relationships with seals next with Ashley. But if you guys ever want to support the Conservancy in any way, we do have the Shark Center, which is located in Chatham. We are not open yet. Hopefully in phase 3 for Massachusetts, we'll be allowed to open. But if you ever a Massachusetts resident, we have license plates. So you can be part of the awesome White Shark License Plate Club. We do offer volunteers. We have awesome merchandise. I'm wearing some tonight. So, or if you just want to follow us on any of our social media pages to, you know, stay more informed about what's happening here along our coastline. So thank you, guys.
Nice. Thank you, Kristen. That was that. I mean, I learned a ton. It sounds like, to be honest, the guy you work with who drives the planes, the spotter planes, Wayne? That sounds like Wayne sounds like he has the coolest job I've ever heard of.
He
Um,
does. He also works with Woods Hole sometimes to help them spot. So Woods Hole right now is doing an awesome study with whale sharks here off of our coastline. So if you go like 100 miles offshore, they're finding whale sharks. So
yeah.
Wayne will help them spot them too. So he's the coolest job.
Yeah, that is awesome. And you gave some awesome information, incredible stuff. I surf a bunch. I'm definitely taking what you said to heart, checking out the app, the Sharktivity app. And with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ashley Stokes, the Marine Mammal Rescue Manager at Seacoast Science Center, who will be talking a lot more about where seals and great white sharks meet. So take it away, Ashley. Oh, you might be muted, Ashley, just to let you know.
It would help if I unmute myself.
There you go.
Let's try this again. So
Welcome
thank you
to the party.
everybody for coming out tonight and for spending some of your evening with us. I always tell people when we do these presentations, I hope that you come away with at least one piece of new information from each of our presenters tonight. So if you have any questions as well, feel free to chat Brian throughout this presentation, and we will get to question and answer at the end. So we're happy to stay on and get to as many questions as we can. So moving forward with how some of these seals interact with these sharks that we just learned a whole lot about from Kristen. My name is Ashley. I'm with the Seacoast Science Center. I run our marine mammal rescue program here. We started our program in 2014. I've been here at the Seacoast Science Center since 2005, and simultaneously while working here, doing various jobs. My background is in marine biology. I've always had a passion for marine mammals, so I've also been doing, up until we started our program, working with New England Aquarium as a volunteer for them with their marine animal program. So I've been with it for a long time, so I've seen a lot of different things, so I hope you guys learn a lot. With that being said, once I get into a few of the seal cases, so I'll show you guys some photos of some shark interactions we've experienced. There are a handful of more graphic photos. So I saw some kiddos on here, but for anybody else that might be sensitive to that, there just a little bit of a disclaimer, there are some relatively graphic photos coming up once we get into the case studies. So as we move forward, so kind of what are the goals of marine mammal rescue? So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Marine Mammal Protection Act, it was passed in 1972, towards the end of the year in October, and it protects all marine mammals. So it's essentially illegal to hunt them, harass them, and harassment is a very gray term. So it basically is anything on the beach or out at sea that alters that animal's natural behaviors. So even if you, for example, whistle to the animal on the beach to get that perfect photo, that is categorized as harassment. So it is important to give these animals their space so that they can live naturally on the shores and examine them from a distance and enjoy them from a distance. Binoculars come in handy. I always keep some in my car, so I encourage you, if you do visit the beaches a lot, to do the same. They come in very handy, and you can get them pretty cheap now. So our goals with this program is to minimize the threat of the health and safety, not only of these animals, but to humans as well. It's very common for people to not understand that they're protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act and that they shouldn't approach them on the beach. So the safety measures are in place not only for the animals, but the humans as well, because especially with some of these more aggressive species, they will lash out at both people and dogs if they do approach them on the beach. So we always are trying to do a lot of education. So that's the next goal of ours, is to educate the public as much as we can. It's something we do a lot of. We like to think that we do it really well. So we spend a lot of time on it. It's really important to us to educate the public as much as we can about these beautiful animals that you can encounter on the beaches. We also, one of our goals is to lessen the pain and suffering of these animals. You'll probably hear me say this a couple of times, but we certainly can't save all of them. It's not a goal of ours to save all of them. It would disrupt some of the natural balance out there. But for animals that are out there really suffering and dying what could be a slow and painful death, or may otherwise be a slow and painful death, for some of those animals we do step in. and get them the care that they need, or in some cases, humanely euthanize them if that is what's best for that animal. We do collect a lot of scientific data. There's a lot of paperwork that goes along with this field of work, but that's because they are federally protected. A number of researchers are trying to keep an eye on these animals, keep an eye on populations. For those of you from the area, you may have remembered the unusual mortality event in 2018 over the summer that went throughout the winter. It's actually just in the process of closing formally now, but we had an exorbitant number of dead and dying gray seals and harbor seals throughout Maine, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. So we're trying to stay out ahead of that. And then we also, of course, have to comply with legal agreements with government agencies. NOAA Fisheries does oversee all of this work that any of our organizations do that are in this field. And then, of course, the realities of response and rescue. And hopefully the Wi-Fi stays good. We're having a pretty good storm right now at Seacoast Science Center. But not all of the animals can and will survive, which I've mentioned already. And especially right now, as we go through the COVID pandemic, rehabilitation space is very limited. So we have to kind of pick and choose what animals we're going to take to rehabilitation versus either letting nature take its course or, in some cases, humanely euthanizing. And then, of course, human safety always comes first. We're constantly reminding our staff and volunteers of that. So right now would be a perfect scenario of if we got a call on the hotline, we wouldn't be sending a volunteer out in a thunder and lightning storm. So human safety always trumps animal safety. So where do these animals haul out? For us, up in New Hampshire, so we respond in New Hampshire and northern Massachusetts. Our most common species is the harbor seal. But as you move down towards the Cape, one of their most common species is the gray seal. That's not to say we don't get gray seals, because we do, but harbor seals for us are just more commonly seen. So in our area, that photo to the left, you come up here by number 1, that's a seal haul out up in Maine. It's a gray seal rookery, so it's an area where gray seals congregate to give birth to their young. And then as we move south a little bit, number 2 and number 3 look very close to each other, but it's just because the map is zoomed out. Number 2 is right by the shore. It's called Seal Rocks locally in Rye, New Hampshire, and that's a common harbor seal haul out. But it's pretty small. On any given low tide, you'll see about 6 to 12 seals out there. And then if you move offshore 7 miles, there's the Isles of Shoals, and we do have Duck Island out there, which is predominantly a gray seal haul out area, but there are occasionally harbor seals seen out there as well. And then as you move south a little bit more down into Salisbury, Massachusetts, we have an area known as Badger's Rocks. It sits right by the mouth of the Merrimack River, and it's a known harbor seal haul out. Brian and I went out there to film a video for Marine Mammal Rescue just about a month and a half ago, and there were over 100 harbor seals out there. And then just a couple of days after that, we didn't see any gray seals out there, but we got a call on our reporting hotline of what the viewer thought was a walrus. So we asked them to send us photos, and sure enough, it was a big adult male gray seal. So they do come out there as well, just not as often. And then of course, as you move south a little bit more down to the Cape, those photos on the right, the photo in the middle shows you harbor seal haul outs down around Cape Cod, all of those yellow dots. And then the photo on the right also shows you the gray seal haul outs, but also the rookeries or the pupping areas are those red stars. So generally seals will choose rocky outcroppings to haul out on as groups, and gray seals are more likely to haul out as groups than harbor seals. Gray seals will also pup in groups versus harbor seals typically are solo in this area. So moving a little bit into shark interactions, they're not extremely common in our area. Since our program started in 2014, we have 8. Though with that being said, we just before this webinar started, we got a phone call on our hotline with what could be a shark interaction or predation event. So we need to look at that animal after this webinar to see if we can determine what may have been going on there. So it's not a lot. It doesn't happen common in our area, but they do certainly happen. But we can't always definitively determine if it was shark or not. Luckily, we do have a great relationship with Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. So once we do get these animals that we think could be a shark interaction or predation event, we can take measurements and photos of those bite wounds and send them in to hopefully get a positive ID, or at least, yes, it's a shark interaction. But shark interactions are also commonly mistaken with propeller wounds. So they do sometimes look similar, but here's kind of a good example. The left photo shows you a shark predation, and the right photo shows you an animal that was hit by a boat or propeller wounds. So generally speaking, propeller wounds are going to be linear and parallel for the most part, unless the animal is turning as it gets hit. But the shark predations tend to be a little bit more jagged, or at least have jagged edges. So that's one of the telltale signs to be able to tell them apart. But unfortunately, it's not always that easy. So I'll show you a few of our cases. So here's where the photos do get a little bit graphic, as similar to these that are on the screen now. So just to let you know. So here is the most recent, with the exception of possibly today. But this was down off of Cape Ann, Massachusetts, in an area known as Thatcher Island. This was last July. So we got photos of this animal. It was on a rocky outcropping, so we couldn't just walk up to it and access it. But luckily, the reporting party did get very good photos. So we were able to send those along, and John Chisholm did confirm that as white shark predation. The status of this animal is unknown because, as I mentioned, it was on a rocky outcropping and it did not surface again on the mainland for us to be able to examine it further. And here is another. This animal was rescued in Gloucester back in March of 2018. And this was another animal that was confirmed white shark predation. So John Chisholm actually went to National Marine Life Center with our colleagues to look at this animal and did confirm it as white shark predation. And he had explained that the easiest way for a telltale sign, as you can see in this wound here, the very jagged triangular edges. And that's typical of a white shark predation event. So this animal had multiple wounds, but it did escape the shark predation event. She did overcome her injuries, which I'm sure Geneva will talk a little bit about how they do that and how they get these animals to heal. And she was released in June of that same year. And then if we move on to Hampton, New Hampshire, so you'll notice a little bit of a trend here. With our animals, they're predominantly harbor seals. That's most of what we see here. The phone call we got today was a gray seal that we haven't confirmed yet whether its injuries are shark related or not. But most of what we do see up here is harbor seal interactions with sharks. But in listening to a lot of Dr. Greg Skomel's talks, he was saying that sharks actually prefer gray seals. So if you think of it like this, an adult gray seal can be upwards for the males of 800 pounds, whereas our harbor seals are significantly smaller, topping out at about 250 pounds. So there's a big difference there between the two species. And also, gray seals just aren't quite as common for us up here as they are down on Cape Cod. So this animal was in Hampton Beach back in September of 2015, and she was actually euthanized. She had already turned septic, so you can see in the bottom left photo that infection had taken over her body. It was down into her bone, and she was definitely in a lot of pain. So for that animal, transport to rehab isn't extremely close, so we can either take them up to Maine, down to our colleagues at National Marine Life Center just before the Cape, or also when they do reopen, back down at Mystic, Connecticut. So it's tough on these animals. It's not natural for them to be in kennels. So in some cases, like this animal, her chance of survival, even if we got her down to rehab, was very slim. So in the case of this animal, we did determine with our vet that her best course of treatment was humane euthanasia. And then we have this one. So this animal was also in September. Down on Crane Beach, for those of you familiar, it's in Ipswich, Massachusetts. And with the exception, if you just saw this photo, probably from the other side actually, you'd see a pretty healthy harbor seal. This animal was extremely alert. We like to see that they're keeping their head and their hind flippers elevated off the ground. So this animal was pretty healthy. You can also see in this photo, right around the eyes, it's wet and matted down. So we refer to that as a hydration ring. And the bigger the hydration ring, the better hydrated the animal is. So this animal, despite its fresh wounds, was very healthy. So we did collect this animal. Those wounds were down actually to the bone. So you could see the jaw exposed. But with the exception of the wound, which was extremely fresh, this animal had nothing else visible going on. So we did transport him to rehabilitation at Mystic Aquarium. And you can see his progression in the bottom photos, right to the day before his release. And he overcame his injuries. He did certainly have some scarring, but you can see that these animals can overcome a lot. And the last one, I apologize, this is probably the most graphic of them all, but this was right on Plum Island in Massachusetts. In July of 2015, this animal was already deceased, but this was a suspect shark predation event. So it was not confirmed, but we do suspect the bite radius was a lot bigger than a coyote, which they do have a lot of down on Plum Island. So we do suspect that it was shark, but we can't say for sure because we didn't get it confirmed. But again, that animal was already deceased. So what are the ecological roles of seals? I'll go through this pretty quickly. Seals are mesopredators, meaning that they're not the top predator, which is where the great white would be, but they are mesopredators. So they are pretty high in the food chain, but their diets do differ a lot. There's a lot of diet studies going on right now. And they eat roughly 4.5% of their body weight a day. And again, that fluctuates a lot. So you'll see slightly different numbers depending on which papers you look at. But it varies on anything from how old the animal is it a reproducing female that may be pregnant? Is it an animal that's in molt? They may not eat as much because they spend more time on land. So they do have very diverse diets as well. But a lot of a very interesting message that I've learned a lot of in the last couple of years is a lot of the diet studies that are going on right now are actually showing that a couple of the predominant prey species for these animals is actually turning out to be white hake and sand lance. And an interesting thing about white hake is they are a predatory species on larval cod. Certainly one of the species in the forefront of the commercial fishing industry and different regulations to try to get that population to bounce back. So certainly not to say that seals don't eat cod. They eat bass, they eat lobsters. So they eat a variety of different prey. But one of their predominant prey items is also white hake, which is eating the baby cod. So that's a pretty interesting thing as well. So we're constantly learning more and more from these animals. So it's really important to continue the research on them. So anytime an animal is fresh dead on the beach, we'll do our very best to get it off the beach and into a lab setting to do a necropsy or a post-mortem exam to learn more about them and to take samples from them. So here's a pretty, even though it may look complex to some, a pretty simplified food web of the harp seal, which is one of the species that we see come down from the Arctic in the winter months. But of course, this doesn't show the harp seal's predator. It starts from the harp seal down. But of course, they would be predated on by polar bears and killer whales, sharks, but it shows them from the top down. And again, it may look complex to some, but this is actually a pretty simplified version. If you step back even further from that, kind of to the top of the tree view, this is what food webs commonly look like. So this is where, in the red circle here, the mesopredator, this is where the seals would fit in. So you can see things get very complicated. It always sounds like, you know, the shark eats the seal and the seal eats the fish and the fish eats the phytoplankton, but it's just not that simple. It gets very, very complex very quickly. But it's exciting to learn more about these animals and how they fit in with the sharks and how together they all fit into the ecosystem to maintain a healthy baseline of an ecosystem as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Geneva. I apologize, I went a little over time, but we'll stay for questions at the end. So
Thanks,
thank you all.
Ashley. You made some really awesome points there, and I think what you just ended on about just where seals fit in this whole picture of an ecosystem is going to lead really well into our next speaker, Geneva Mommsen from National Marine Life Center. So, Geneva, take it away. And just a reminder, I've seen some awesome questions come in here. If you have any more questions, shoot us a message in the chat, and we'll be going through that right after Geneva presents here. So, all of you.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. My name is Geneva, as I just stated, and I am with the National Marine Life Center. I am our education and volunteer coordinator, so I'm happy to talk about any of that if people have questions about that. But tonight, I'm really excited to talk a bit more about the role of rehabilitation that National Marine Life Center fulfills, specifically for shark bite survival seals, if you will, and how we go about working with those deeper wounds. So I'm going to pull this up from the beginning and we'll get started. So I hope everyone can see this. So I'll be focusing on our work with shark bites, but also other deep wounds, because there are some similarities and some differences. And the National Marine Life Center, just for those of you that haven't tuned into webinars earlier or aren't familiar with our work, we are a nonprofit organization located in Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts. So we are right before the Cape begins. We're right on the canal near Massachusetts Maritime Academy. And our primary role is to rehabilitate and release injured and ill seals as well as sea turtles. We also operate an education center, much like Atlantic White Shark Conservancy and Seacoast Science Center, and do a lot of science on site. So we've talked a lot about how seals are part of this natural food chain and dynamic with white sharks and many other species of sharks. But how are they adapted to survive? As we saw in that wonderful footage that Kristen presented, you know, seals sometimes do escape, and many times they can survive these bites. So we saw that one seal just flip away and completely slap Lumpy and get out of there. And that's because they're very fast, not necessarily as fast as those white sharks, cruising around like 10, 12 miles per hour, but they can have bursts up to 22 miles per hour for some of those gray seals. And that maneuverability is key that we saw. We were able to see that seal just completely twist on a dime. And this is something that the white sharks just cannot do. They're much larger animals. They're still pretty agile, but it's going to take them a little bit more to move around. Think of a sports car versus a semi-truck, if you will. One of them can make a U-turn a little bit easier than the other. So they're naturally adapted to avoid and get out of those predation events and almost outwit those sharks at times. If they can't get away in that fashion, they also have the best of both worlds, being able to be in the water and on land. And they'll haul out for a variety of reasons, but it's also to escape those predators that are kind of bound to the water. Seals do breathe air, and they can haul out for giving birth to thermoregulate to rest and avoid those predators. So that's one reason that we might be seeing these gray seals and harbor seals very close to that shoreline, as we saw in the photo with Atlantic White Shark Conservancy's research vessel right on the line of that beach. And it wouldn't be uncommon for us to also, and many of you have seen, the seals either resting on the beach or just feet from you in the water. And so they will be nearby to escape the water quickly if need be. They also have natural defenses. If they can't avoid a predation event, they can survive it if they get away after the bite occurs, with this very thick blubber layer that they will have as adults, inches thick, especially these gray seals. As Ashley mentioned, an adult male gray seal is upwards of 800 pounds. These are massive animals. And a white shark's teeth and jaws are powerful to get through that. But if they get away, those wounds can heal with assistance at a rehabilitation center. and without it, and we'll talk about how those wounds heal in just a moment. It's also that they are specifically active most often during the day, and there's still definitely more studies that need to be done to understand when these seals are most active, what behaviors they're engaging in at what time. But it's possible that seals and their behavioral adaptations to avoid predation might be some of the same lessons that Kristen was talking to us about on how we can be shark smart. You know, there's obviously, if there's a seal in the water, that's not the best time for you to go swimming. That's a great opportunity to have a snack on the beach. But think about crepuscular behavior being active at dawn and dusk. We often are not going to see those seals in the water at that time. They'll be hauled out. So there's a chance that we can learn something from those seals' behaviors in learning how we can be even more of these predators in the water. So in the event that a seal does get involved with one of those white sharks and becomes part of that food chain, but survives the bite, they could be brought to a rehabilitation facility like National Marine Life Center. And we don't just deal with the shark bites and other wounds. We also work with patients that have been entangled, might have a variety of illnesses, ingestion of plastic, and right now we're working with all 11 of our seal pups having been maternally separated. But recently we did have a shark bite surviving seal who I'll go into that case study momentarily. But all seals at National Marine Life Center, regardless of why they were brought to our facility, will be worked with. They will get x-rays or radiographs to diagnose illnesses that we can't necessarily see up front. We'll see if potentially that bite went down to the bone and if it caused any injuries there. We'll do blood work on site. We're fortunate to be able to do that. We can provide subcutaneous fluids for hydration therapy and other ways. Right now we're doing a lot of pup formula to replace mother's milk for those maternally separated cases. We provide enrichment devices and medicine, vaccinations, and then wound care, which we're about to explore. So there's a lot that goes on depending on the patient in our care. So here are some different injuries. Note that there's many different causes for these wounds. So take a moment and see with those on the side, the shark bite, the propeller and boat strike, a gray seal causing a wound, and an unknown, and just take a quick guess on your own of which one is which. And I'll click in a moment and you'll see those slide across. And Ashley, you gave us a little hint about the difference between a shark bite and a propeller. So let's see how well our guests get this. So there is our shark bite case, and you'll get to meet that seal momentarily. We have a propeller and boat strike down on the bottom left. The one that just went over, that is a gray seal that has a wound from another gray seal we suspect. And an unknown injury, and that's to the tail of that animal. So real quickly before we move on, the shark bite victim, that is Harry Potter. He has since been released. We're going to talk more about his case. That tail wound was from one of our previous patients named Hagrid. That tail was successfully amputated to prevent sepsis and infection. This here with the gray seal wound is Brant. He was actually, we suspect, it's not confirmed, a victim of gray seal infanticide. So adult male gray seals will attack and often even kill young gray seals. And this is a common behavior in many different species in the animal kingdom. And this propeller and boat strike, that is Remus. And unfortunately, Remus was not able to survive those wounds. So that's something important to note here that we would like to emphasize, is that our shark bite survivor was released, but the seal that had injuries that were due to human interaction with that boat did not survive. So what do we do for this wound care? You saw these are some graphic images here. How do we treat these wounds? So most often, we're not going to be stitching up these wounds. Seals will actually heal from the inside out. And if you look closely at those photos, if you want to, you'll see that they are pretty wide open. So there's not always enough space to stitch them up, but we want to make sure that the debris can constantly be flushed out and not trapped within it. That could lead to any infection. And often the damage is greater than can be stitched up. So how do we treat these wounds while they're left open? Luckily, there are a couple different ways, and every patient will require different treatment, which is why we have an outstanding animal care team and veterinary team that works very closely together to figure out exactly what will work best for each patient. So a few of the treatments that will work for different wounds will be adding systematic antibiotics and pain medication. Pain medication is incredibly important to our patients with wounds, especially those with shark bite wounds, because if they are in too much pain, and depending on where those injuries are, we may not be able to restrain them as we normally would for feedings, and we can see a huge decrease in appetite. And if you've ever been sick or ill before, being able to get your strength back up is super important. Also, salt water can be prescribed. Obviously, in the wild, these animals are in salt water all the time. And luckily, salt water does have these properties like a saline flush or a saltwater flush that's going to help reduce that bacterial buildup. So that's a naturally healing and cleaning environment for them. We'll also do some additional cleaning with betadine, which is an antiseptic, and add saline flushes as well. And occasionally, when the wound is close to being completely healed, we'll add on some honey for those antibacterial properties, but we can't add the honey to those wounds right away. If you imagine, you get debris in there, even once it's been debris, these animals are in temporary care with us, so as much as we clean their areas, things can still get back into that wound. And so being able to constantly flush it out without a sticky, gooey barrier that's going to lock it in is optimal. So eventually that honey can be added, and that is one of our last treatments to complete the wound. So keep in mind Harry Potter down there, his wounds on the bottom right, because you'll see how he looks during his release very soon. And just a note about sepsis, we've mentioned it a couple times, but some of you might not be familiar with what it is. So it is a life-threatening condition, and it's caused when the body reacts to an infection, but the body's reaction is very, very strong, abnormally strong. So the body is naturally going to release chemicals in the bloodstream to fight an infection. This is where we get a fever, and we might feel warm to the touch. We might get some swelling, some inflammation. But when the body reacts abnormally with an increased inflammation to the extreme throughout the body, that can cause organ systems to shut down and can ultimately be fatal. So Ashley was able to show that wonderful case study of the seal with the suspected shark bite wound that was septic when found. And sepsis can be very hard to reverse in these animals. So here are just a few images of what rehabilitation looks like in general before we get into a case study. So they're provided with environmental enrichment devices. They will have time in our pre-release pool once they are all well and good. Radiograph down in the bottom left, so we'll wrap them carefully in a towel and wear a lot of protective gear because we are hands-on with them at that point to, again, see what lies underneath for those injuries. And the bottom right is another restraint photo of getting ready to do a blood draw. And in looking at that photo, you can see that if an animal has wounds on their back or up near their neck, that can be incredibly difficult to work with while keeping the animal as comfortable as possible and reduce their level of stress. One of the most critical things that we do when working with patients for any injury is to make sure that we keep their stress level as low as possible. High stress levels can reduce the body's ability to fight off infection and reduce their immune system efficiency. So here's that case study I've been constantly mentioning. This is Harry Potter. Harry Potter came to us on October 25th of 2019. So he is our most recent shark bite surviving seal. So he was a male yearling when he was found. So he's a little bit older now. He's getting to be a juvenile, almost an adult. And so you can see those wounds, and they covered about 2/3 of his body. He came to us from Biddeford, Maine. So thank you to our partners at Marine Mammals of Maine for getting him to us. And he was very challenging to restrain, again, just based on where those wounds are. When we restrain our patients to do tube feeds or exams, we will have our legs tucked behind ourselves to kind of control that back end and make sure that they are as still as possible, so it keeps them safe and our team safe during procedures. But if you can imagine, that's not exactly where you're going to want to put any pressure when there is a fresh wound like that. And these wounds did go down into the muscle, but they did not get to the bone at all. So this was a relatively cut and clean case. And you can see there on that second image at the top in the middle, those jagged edges that are characteristic of that shark predation. So for Harry Potter, the most crucial elements of his care included cleaning of the wound and the area surrounding it. So when cleaning the wound, we're flushing it out, getting rid of that debris daily, if not twice a day, just to keep it in a healing environment. And sometimes we'll need to carefully clean and almost even in some cases, shave the area around that wound just to make sure that it is kept clean and promotes healing overall. And he received treatments of salt water, so he would have access throughout his day for periods of time to a saltwater pool, but he didn't have constant access right away. None of our patients will have access all day right away. They've got to rebuild that strength from that illness or injury. But the saltwater time for him kept that wound clean, and he built his strength back up pretty quickly. He also received a lot of different antibiotics to make sure that he didn't enter a septic state. He also got antiseptic rinses and soaps. So there's a lot of care that goes in, and you can imagine the round-the-clock care that it requires to keep these wounds clean, keep the animal comfortable, and just watching their behavior to make sure that their pain is managed. Seals and many other animals are not going to be the first ones to let you know that they are weaker or in pain. And this is a survival behavioral adaptation. We know that predators will go after those sicker and weaker individuals, so you're not going to show it if you are a prey species. Harry Potter also dealt with pneumonia and anemia, and poor initial blood work, was underweight. And some of those can be related back to that shark bite, such as anemia. So to combat the anemia, he was actually prescribed iron to boost his RBC or red blood cell count. And luckily, you can see on that bottom picture there in the right-hand corner, you can just barely see the scar marks. So he made an amazing recovery and was back out to the wild less than 2 months later. So this just shows that seals can survive a shark bite. So I'm going to end on the note that seals and sharks are ultimately a power couple in our environment. As Ashley introduced us to, the seal's role in an ecosystem is as a mesopredator for our ecosystem here on the western side of the Atlantic Ocean, or the eastern coast of the United States. They're controlling the populations of fish that would normally prey on larval stages of cod and other important commercial fisheries. So they're needed in there to make sure all of these fish species stay at the appropriate levels that we can conserve and maintain. Beyond that, though, they're not just playing a role in the marine ecosystem, but they're actually deeply involved. And I encourage you to check out this link when we send out the recorded video. This was a study done at the Marine Biological Laboratories by one of their students, that they play a role in this translocation of marine nutrients to terrestrial environments. If you think about it, all animals produce waste, and seals will eliminate some of that waste on the beaches where they haul out. So their studies have shown that the beaches where these seals haul out have higher nitrogen contents, and it's the nitrogen that can be traced through stable isotope analysis, so a little bit of chemistry in there for you. But we can tell that these nutrients they're depositing and locating back onto terrestrial environments are coming from the marine ecosystem. And so both of these animals are going to play a role in connecting the ocean habitats as well as ocean to land. So we do need them both. And we still don't even know the full scope of their ecological importance to our habitat and the many habitats that other species of seals habitate around the world. And of course, there's the ecotourism aspect that kind of helps keep Cape Cod and New England going during the tourist season. And sharks play a very vital role in the ecosystem as well that Kristen touched on. They're the apex predators. So they're controlling populations of our mesopredators, obviously, and the lower trophic level species. So they make sure that, you know, if it gets too high, there's only so much carrying capacity for them. They play a vital role in keeping the oceans clean and feeding on those whale carcasses so that they're not out there for prolonged periods of time. They're breaking it down into smaller bites for other predators to go after. They're completely relied upon for that. And they're feeding on the weaker and less fit individuals that and this contributes to the natural selection model. And I was asked an interesting question by one of my friends recently that I'd like to bring up here of, you know, the fact that rehabilitation of these animals, are we taking away a food source for these sharks? Is rehabilitation kind of a reversal role of that? And as Ashley mentioned, the limited space that our rehabilitation centers can offer is only such a small percentage of the seal population that is out there for sharks to naturally predate on. So technically, yes, it does remove some of their food sources from the environment, but not in a way that would affect that food chain and how complicated we saw that get with Ashley's presentation. And of course, there's the ecotourism with sharks as well. So together, these animals are really indicating that our ecosystem has rebounded. If you were with us for our last webinar, you heard all about the history of marine mammals on the east coast of the United States and how we've kind of seen this dip over the last 100 or so years before the Marine Mammal Protection Act, before the Endangered Species Protection Act, that we'd extirpated and hunted these species, both sharks and seals, to the point nearly of no return. And luckily, we've seen that increase now, and that's what we're focused on. But if we remember, there's two high points to this curve. We just have to remember that first high curve of we're getting back to where we were, which to me, this is a cause for celebration. So I am going to turn it back over to Brian to facilitate our questions. And I hope you all enjoyed seeing a little bit more about what it looks like to care for a seal that has been a victim of a shark bite and how we do that.
Awesome, Geneva. Thanks for bringing the circle of life full circle for us here. I think you made some awesome points. And now we'll dive right into our Q&A session. So we've got a ton of questions already lined up in the chat here. So I'm going to start off with that. Our first one comes from Daniela Peratt. And this one is, how is the state protection of great whites different from federal protection? So Kristen, I will push that one over to you, our great white shark expert.
Thank you. So that is a great question. And really the protections are not different at all. So the federal protection is that they're protected in federal waters. And then the state protection is that they're protected in the state waters. So Brian, if you remind me, if I think for state waters, it's 2 miles out or 3 miles out. You're muted.
Oh, he's muted.
Oh, I believe it's 3 miles.
It's 3. So for the state of Massachusetts, for that state water, it's 3 miles out, and then once you hit that, then it goes into that federal water. So in all oceans around Massachusetts, and then on the federal side, those white sharks are protected. If anyone asks, are they protected in any other states? I am not sure about every state about their state protections. I know in New Jersey they are protected, and in the Carolinas they are, but I'm not sure about every exact state what their protections are, but on a federal level, they are.
Nice. And this is a second question for you, Kristen. So stay ready here. So referring to the map that you had that showed the number of pings that you were getting, are those individual sharks, or is it possible that the same shark pinged a pinger multiple times?
So let me quickly pull this up because it'll be easier for that. Okay, so with this, if we look on the outer arm of the cape here, so we see that 50, 70, 69, 64, etc. That is, so with that 50, that is 50 individual tag sharks. That 70 is 70 individual tag sharks. But between that 50 and 70 and 69, some of those could be the same shark swimming back and forth to those receivers. We have that white shark James that I was talking to you about. We will see him pretty much along here south of Chatham, along Monomoy and the National Wildlife Refuge. So we will see him pretty much on these three receivers all summer long, versus we have a white shark named Marianne. We see her pretty much at every single receiver up the outer arm of the Cape. We see her come down into Sandwich, and then she's recorded off of these receivers on the north and south shore. So yes, so some of these sharks are hitting multiple receivers. Some are hitting one, some are hitting a lot. So it can be the same.
Nice. And so I've got another question. This is specific to a location from Jessica Sherman. Have they ever been spotted around Wells, Maine? I know that might be a little tougher for you guys to answer just because you mostly have your pingers around here, but I know they do move between here and even like Nova Scotia, correct?
Yes. So I'm pulling up our Sharktivity app. So recorded shark sightings around the Maine area. I don't know if my green screen's not going to let me show my phone. Is it? No, it's not.
Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry. If you can kind of see it, there's Maine and then there's Canada. So we do see shark sightings around there, and then we do have the receiver data from Canada on here as well. So nice. We do see them around the Halifax area. So I'm sorry, I don't know the exact location. I wish I could.
I think the best answer is to check out the Sharktivity app, honestly. But and so this is a really good question here from Daniela again. So she said this is fascinating. How deep does the water have to be for a shark to swim? I'm curious about this too.
So I have been out on a research boat. So I originally started out as AWSC as an intern right out of college. So when I was Greg Scomel's intern, I was out on the research boat. One day I was like, wow, we are in pretty shallow water. And I looked over on the boat on the center console. We were in 4 feet deep. So this is why it is suggested by, if you are on those beaches on the outer arm, to stay waist deep or less, because these sharks can get very close to shore. And with that, it's also, the Cape is a very dynamic coastline. If anyone has been on the outer arm of Cape Cod, really like Nauset Beach, if it's high tide, like one step you're ankle deep, one step you're knee deep, and the next step you're hitting that trench and you're almost over waist deep to your shoulders. So in that high tide range, sharks can really get close to shore, really swim back and forth along those shorelines, waiting for that seal to pop through those breakers. So
nice.
Yeah, so they can get in very shallow.
Yeah, no, that's really cool to know. I'm very curious about that myself. I didn't go. I was on the Cape recently, and I didn't really go in farther than my waist. But this next question, Kristen, I'll give you a break here, just a breather. But so for Geneva here, are the seals that tagged before they are released after rehabilitation? That's the question that we have from Denise.
Hi, Denise. Yes, we do have a couple of seals that do receive satellite tracking devices. I can actually show one right here. So this is what our tags look like if my green screen will allow it. I'm actually going to disable that for a moment, just so you all can see it. So we use satellite tags, not acoustic tags. Ours unfortunately have to break the water with this wire. but they're really expensive. So we've only been able to tag a few of our animals, and none have been shark bite survivors at this stage yet. But we did have one that had otitis media and ear infection. You can definitely check him out on our website. Look for articles about Jones, the harbor seal.
Nice, nice. And now, Kristen, back to you. Not the longest break here, but what is the largest white shark, in parentheses, big blue? Any chances Megalodon still exists? And this question is coming from Bill.
So, Big Blue is part of, I think it's Deep Blue. She is part of the Pacific population of white sharks. So they see her, she was spotted off of Hawaii last year. She's been spotted off of Guadalupe Island in Mexico. So she's part of that population. So note that these populations of white sharks around the world, they are all separate. They do not intertwine. They do not interact. So we are not going to see a white shark from South Africa come up here to the coast of Massachusetts. They do stay in their oceans. But with that, then the largest white shark that has been recorded here is white shark Curly. So you saw her ID markings on her gill slits when I was going through my slideshow. So Curly is an 18-feet female. So she's pretty big. She's pretty beefy. She's quite large. So on average, a white shark does get to be about 18 feet long. You do have those outliers like Deep Blue that they get up to 21 feet long as well. But those are the ones, that exceed the expectations. So on average, they are about 18 feet in length. And then was there another question with that?
Does Megalodon still exist?
I'm sorry, guys. No, I'm sorry. I wish I need to have that as just like a PowerPoint slide, like Megalodon is extinct, but they are extinct. So with a white shark getting up to 21 feet in length, we see them eating marine mammals like seals and feeding on dead whales. It is thought that the great white did evolve from the Megalodon. Their teeth are very similar in shape. So with that, if we had a shark like the Megalodon that was estimated to be 60 feet in length, 3 times the size of a white shark, most likely you would assume that the Megalodon would be eating those larger marine mammals such as whales, and we don't see whales with huge bite marks out of them or half-eaten whales. So I think it's extinct.
I'd hope so. Being a surfer myself, I wouldn't want to see a Megalodon out there. So another question, this one's from Holly. So you mentioned that there have been whale sharks sighted off the coast of New England. Who is doing that research, and is there any place you can direct us for additional information on that topic? If you want to.
I'm not sure about the researcher. I do apologize, but that is going through Woods Hole. So the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. So I just Google like whale sharks and Woods Hole, and I'm sure there's been lots of articles that have been written about it. So I'm sorry, I wish I could give you more, but.
Nice. And now we'll pivot over to seals. So what do we know? This question comes from Bill again. What do we know about seal communication? Are they social animals when swimming? How do they alert other seals to the presence of a predator or shark? Can we differentiate the different sounds that seals make? Maybe Ashley, I don't know if you, this is a tough one. This is a really good question.
Certainly on land, they've been vocal, but I don't know a whole lot about underwater communication. But as far as our seals go up here and how social they are with one another, we don't in New Hampshire and Northern Mass have big haulouts like they do on the Cape. For example, I mentioned our Badger's Rock haulout of harbor seals with the occasional gray seal mixed in there. But at any one time, you're only talking maybe 100 to 150 seals. Whereas down on the Cape, I mean, you can see thousands of gray seals hauled out in one spot at any given time. But as far as, they go up here, they're pretty solitary animals, especially for our harbor seals. They don't haul out in those big aggregate groups. So it's hard to say. I don't know a whole lot. I haven't done a lot of research about their communication underwater, so I don't know specifically about that. But one of the common misconceptions we often will get on the hotline, especially if the seal has a visible injury, even if it's not necessarily shark related, is, people will be concerned about, was that animal, did it come out of the water because it's trying to get away from sharks? Or even if the animal is healthy and it's hauled out on land, the common misconception oftentimes is people think that it's trying to escape danger, not realizing the flip side of seals are only semi-aquatic. So they do rely on coming out on shore or on rocky outcroppings for different lengths of time, given their circumstances. But certainly, when they are sick or injured, they'll haul out for longer periods of time or stay on shore for longer periods of time. But that's not always indicative of trying to escape a predatory species.
Nice.
Well, it's not a full answer, but hopefully that helped you out.
Yeah, definitely. Now another one from.
Can I interject?
Yeah, go for it.
Just so being out on our research boat and our ecotourism boat, not that they don't make, I haven't seen them like make noises to talk, not saying that they don't do that, because I'm not a seal researcher in any ways, but we did see one time, we just missed a shark prey on a seal, and again, that seal did get away, but you did see there was a fresh bite wound on the side of that individual, and you can tell it was very weak, but it had its group of seal friends swimming around it, and constantly, like, as that seal was like going up through the water, like those seals kept constantly making sure it was covered until like I don't know what destination they were going to, but it was quite interesting to see how they all like kept turns, like taking watch and like surrounding him and making sure he or she was safe. So
that's wild.
Very neat.
That's some really good insight. I mean, you're probably one of the only people who could see that actually happen out there. So I'd be interested to look that up a little bit more. I'll check that out and see if I can and put some extra information in our follow-up email to everyone. But so we're just going to go through a couple more questions here. We're going to try and end around 7:30. So another question from Ben Kearney. I hope I didn't butcher your last name too bad. So this question is a shark more likely to attack a human or a seal when it's in the water? I don't know if you want to touch on that one.
I can, yeah. So it is incredibly rare for a shark to prey on a human. Shark attacks are incredibly rare on a global level, and even here on Cape Cod, where we are seeing these sharks here come close to shore. Now, there are different things that can, I don't want to say increase your probability, but this is why we do give these shark smart tips that if there is a seal in the water, you shouldn't be swimming near that seal because that is that potential prey item. But also, seals are wild animals as well. So we should be looking at all wildlife from a respectful distance, because those seals are under that protected Marine Mammal Protection Act as well. But saying that if you are more likely, if you're beside a seal, there is no way for me to say yes or no with that. That is up to you if you want to enter the water at your own risk. If you are surfing, if you're wave surfing or windsurfing, that is something that unfortunately that isn't a probability that I can give you. But if you can keep those tips of staying waist deep, surfing with a group as well, and hopefully it can then decrease your risk of being bit, even though it is relatively low.
Yeah, I'd even like to share a statistic. I don't know the exact number, but I'll look this up and add this in the email. But there's significantly more people every year in New York City that bite other people than there are shark attacks that happen worldwide. So just for perspective, it's very rare, very rare. I'll share that study. It's very interesting. But so we're just gonna go with two more questions here real quick before we close out. So this is coming from Amanda L. This is an awesome question. Do you ever see beached sharks if they follow prey too close to shore? I think they're thinking of like the orcas that people see when they're hunting seals. So
it can happen. So last year, I can say we were incredibly lucky because we did not have a shark wash up dead or beach itself. But then also looking at what our seal team was talking about today, even though that animal is dead, we can do a necropsy on it and learn more about that species as well. So it is incredibly sad to see an animal dead, but we can still learn very much from that individual. But we have seen some sharks do that in the past. If anyone is familiar with the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, in 2016, we have the famous story of White Shark Jameson. So Jameson was considered a juvenile white shark. So anywhere between the sizes of like 6 to 10 feet is juvenile stage. And so Jameson was around that 6 to 7 foot range. And the beachgoers saw him swimming, and it was chasing a seabird, and it beached itself on a sandbar. And we were able to save him. And actually we see Jameson come back to the Cape every year. So even though it had that experience of, sharks are not mammals, they cannot breathe out of the water. So he was out of the water for over an hour, and he was still able to survive. And then a few years before that, before I was up here in New England, there was another shark that did beach itself as well. It got caught in the tides, and that one did not unfortunately survive. So it does happen. Again, very rare. We haven't had a shark wash itself up in a very long time. So
wild. That's really cool. I thought that was a really good question. And the last question of the night, this is a great one to close it out on. Where do great white sharks go after they visit New England in the summer, fall months? Where do they go after November?
Great question. So as I said earlier, sometimes we see them continue their way up north. So just because they stop here, they're not here for the year. So some, as we say, they stop here almost like at a rest stop, have a seal meal or two, and then keep continuing up their way. And then they will continue up into New Hampshire and Canada and Maine. But then, sometimes they will turn back around and move that movement down south. So just like we have seen white shark, his name is right out of my head, the white shark we've been tracking on Sharktivity, Josiah, he has we've seen him pinging all up the east coast of the United States. So we have tracked these sharks going into South Carolina, off the coast of Florida, into the Gulf of Mexico. So they frequent the full east coast of the United States. But once they come off of the Massachusetts area, we typically do not see them close to shore like we do here. They are more further offshore.
Nice. I think that was an awesome question to end on. And we'll wrap things up here. I know Ashley needs to go. We just got a call on Seacoast Science Center's hotline about that potential predation case that Ashley's going to run down and check out by I won't say where, but yeah. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who tuned in tonight. This was incredible. Thank you for those who donated to support some of the rehab work that Seacoast Science Center and National Marine Life Center do. Just a reminder, we'll send out an email tomorrow with some follow-up ways that you can get involved, like downloading that Sharktivity app. That might answer some of the other questions that you have about where you see these sharks around our area. And I hope that you guys enjoyed tonight and had a good time and learned something new. So thanks to you all for taking the time out of your day to check this out. Really appreciate everything. And thank you to our speakers.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, anytime. Again, Kristen, Geneva, and Ashley, thank you so much for giving this incredible presentation. I learned a ton. I know everyone else out there probably did too. So yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Enjoy your night.